So tell me, what exactly is snitching?
So snitching is actually a complex social phenomenon. It's kind of taken on a life of its own recently. This book is about a public policy, a long-standing public policy in our criminal justice system, which permits the government to trade guilt for information. So this book is about the practice by which offenders, criminal suspects, and defendants can trade away their own liability or shorten their sentences or get other benefits from the government by giving them information. The explosion in our system's reliance on criminal informants, or snitches as they're sometimes referred to, is a function of the war on drugs. Basically, the past 20 years have seen an immense reliance on this way of getting information and, indeed more importantly, resolving the guilt of people who are in the system, the trading away of guilt for information. There are cases in which using a criminal informant, and by this I mean cutting a deal with a criminal offender, can be an extremely powerful law enforcement tool for investigating organized crime, a corrupt corporation in which no one has any incentive to give up information about each other, penetrating gangs or drug networks. Sometimes the use of an informant is, if not the only way, a very powerful and central way of getting that information. It is everywhere, from street corner arrests to the way we run our jails and prisons, the atmosphere in our institutions of incarceration, where everybody knows that if they can come up with information about each other, they can get a deal. It affects plea bargaining, the way prosecutors decide who should be the witness and who should be the defendant in a particular case. It's central to sentencing, particularly in the federal system, but it's the single largest, or one of the single largest factors that a court takes into consideration in setting a sentence.
Has this reliance on snitching sort of given rise to stop snitching culture? I feel like that's how snitching gets on a lot of our radars.
So for listeners who haven't heard the term, stop snitching was a term that became sort of well-known or popular about 5 or 6 years ago. It actually arose out of an underground DVD that circulated the streets of Baltimore. Well, this motto, this phrase, spread into the broader culture. And so now it doesn't only refer to criminals informing on other criminals, offenders informing, but now in some quarters, in some cities, it's used to refer to anybody who talks to the police, so civilian witnesses, bystanders who see a crime. And it's come to represent what has been a very important challenge and debate in our criminal justice system for decades, which is the lack of trust between communities and police. And so it's become a kind of a shorthand for that problem. Why don't people come forward and talk to the police? Well, it's a complex problem. Some people are afraid. They're afraid they'll be retaliated against. I don't think the answer is to ban or stop the use of criminal informants, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the reason the United States relies so heavily on criminal informants, by contrast, for example, with many European countries who rely less heavily on it, is that the use of criminal informants is really built in to some very important decisions that we've made about how we're going to run our criminal justice system more generally. And centrally, those decisions are about the discretion that we give to police and prosecutors. So a police officer can decide to arrest, or in many cases, more importantly, decide not to arrest someone without ever having to justify that decision to anyone or even write it down. I'll never forget it. I was teaching an evening class at one of the community centers to youth in the neighborhood, and one young boy raised his hands. Could have been more than 12 or 13 years old, and he said, "I got a question. So police let drug dealers stay on the corner because they're snitching. Is that legal? Can the police do that?" And when I explained to him and his friends that yes, the police can do that, they have discretion to permit an offender to remain at large if they choose, he and his friends were disgusted. He said, "Well, the police aren't doing their job." And another said, "So all you got to do is snitch and you can keep on dealing." It was part of their understanding of how the criminal system worked. So from young people all the way up through the adults in the community, they had a sense that criminal informant use was a big part of the way their neighborhoods were being governed.